Hello, everyone. Good morning. I was telling my guest Paul today that I'm feeling the ADHD high today, so we're gonna have a high energy, fun conversation with Paul Jonas. He's the CEO and co-founder of Breezy Billing. Paul, welcome. Would love to hear the basics on you and the origin story of the company.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. So yeah, Paul Jonas, CEO and co-founder of Breezy Billing. We started this company. Well, we officially started talking about this company in it was probably 2013 or 2014. It was a conversation of my father and I. My parents are both clinicians now. My mom's retired, but my dad was on this old software. It was a modular EHR software, and he was telling me how he had to do 14 clicks to do a progress note, and every progress note he hated it a little bit more. I was had a side hustle building websites on WordPress at that time. And so I knew there had to be something out there. So we decided to build an EHR software just for my parents' clinic, the Jonas Center. As we started talking to people about that, we realized that there was really a need for a behavioral health focused EHR platform. There wasn't anything that was making a lot of news back then in the early 20 teens. So we decided to invest in that a little bit more and actually turn that into a company. And that turned into our software Breezy Notes. But then soon after that, after launching that, we realized that there was an even bigger need, and that really hit our niche of just the relational approach that we take with people for revenue cycle management for billing services. And so within 2 years of launching our software, we added Breezy Billing. Fortunately, we were right about that, and Breezy Billing is really what we do today. We just help independent group practices of all sizes deal with insurance and admin and the numbers side of their businesses. So we've now been doing that for over a decade and have had a lot of fun and helped a lot of people.
So in the group practice world, I've definitely come across that need. Lots of practices out there who struggle to collect unpaid balances. What are the core reasons why a number of group practices have so much accounts receivable?
There's a few different things that we typically see. It's like it can be a lack of focus. So it's just not having somebody who is chasing down those dollars. If something gets denied or rejected, there's no one on staff or no one whose job it is to do that. Other times it can just be process or procedures of the practice as well. Where there's not a maximum balance policy or a sliding fee scale that's applied evenly, or you're not charging cards regularly or keeping cards on file when it comes to patient balances. And so those can also, contribute to financial difficulty at practices. And so we really preach, kind of get your processes in order, get your procedures in order. And, if you want to truly help people and be able to survive as an organization helping people, you do need to make sure those dollars are coming in, because that's the lifeblood of your company. And you are a business owner, you are an entrepreneur. Sometimes we have to tell people that is what keeps the gears flowing, so you can keep growing and expanding your vision.
Absolutely. Profit is, I want to say, the only name of the game, because clinical care matters a lot, but profit is super important. So what would you say beyond follow-up, which we just talked about, how a lot of practices kind of just lose track of the importance of it, don't have someone in admin prioritizing it. What are the single most, maybe give me a couple of things that you guys do that move the ball forward really quickly on collecting those balances?
We do a couple things. One is we always ask about your contracts. I mean, if you're having consistent denials, or just having issues getting paid, usually that's a contract issue. And that just means you haven't added your locations, updated an address, all of your providers aren't on there, or they aren't assigned to the panel. So we do look at those contracts first and foremost. And then the other thing we do is we just, we audit that accounts receivable. You just need someone to keep that eyeball on there to really make sure you're following up. It's just, you got to be tenacious on that.
When does it make sense for a practice to outsource that function versus handling it in-house?
There's kind of a sweet spot, and it depends on how a provider or a practice owner wants to operate. If you are not the type of person who's going to chase down dollars, who's going to spend an hour on the phone with the insurance company, if you'd rather spend that hour seeing somebody, that's one of the big signs. It's kind of like, play to your strengths and then outsource your weaknesses. If you know you're not going to do that, then it's worth it. And so we can usually we can usually get to the point where like if you're spending more than 3 hours a month on the phone or 4 hours a month on the phone, you might make more money seeing clients for those 3 or 4 hours. Or for larger groups, there's just a lot more operational complexity. And so we already handle a lot of that in the back end, including just, if you're looking at outsourcing versus employing like a biller, then we handle all the employment issues. If your biller's sick and they're an employee, then you're not getting your billing done for that week or something like that. Whereas somebody like us, we've got backups, we've got people trained, we have managers and stuff like that. So we on the employment side, we really take a cut out of the administrative burden for that as well. Plus, we've got a bunch of people who know a lot. There's a lot of institutional knowledge here. And so when something goes wrong, as an owner, it might take you hours on the phone to figure it out. We might be able to look at the denial, look at the payer, and know for that payer and that denial, it's actually usually this thing. And so we can get it done right away.
A lot of folks, a lot of even longtime practice owners miss some of the nuances of dealing with one payer versus another. And the reality is that Blue Cross of Florida is going to be different than Aetna in New York. It's just the nature of the beast. And to have folks that are fully specialized in understanding those differences, that is a massive value add that I think very few practices can handle in-house.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we've found that's been, a specialty of ours. As you get in, you learn a payer, you'll get denials for one reason, and it's a taxonomy code situation. Actually, it's we've seen some pretty wild things out there.
Yes, yes. And any stories pop to mind, actually, without revealing any specific names? Any wild case studies come up for you that we should share?
There's two, and here, we're based in Minnesota, and there's two payers in Minnesota that I always think about when I think of like the weird one-off stuff, and it's UCare is one of them, where you get constant denials for like provider issues, and this is that taxonomy code I actually alluded to earlier, where it was the billing provider is incorrect, billing provider is incorrect. Well, it turns out UCare had a different requirement than most other payers around taxonomy code. Most didn't require it, but UCare did. So if you didn't have your taxonomy code matching what was on file with the contract, then you'd get denials. And so, that's something we were able to learn and then pass on to all the rest of our customers. There's another one too. Different payers will have different rules for individual, providers who are billing under their NPI 1, their individual NPI, that there are different rules for how to bill for certain payers. So you have to make sure your software or your clearinghouse can handle those differences if there are those rules. And that's why, as I know you speak to group practices, and that's why for us, we preach to anybody who's starting off as a solo practice to build themselves up as a group. Even if they are a group of one, you can still do that. You want to set yourself up because, insurance companies are used to seeing groups. They're used to seeing, businesses, and you should, make sure to set yourself up as a group. And so that's some other knowledge that we've learned to help people, to set themselves up for success whether they're planning to grow their practice or not.
What a great suggestion that I'm not sure if I have heard before. And that's the kind of suggestion that in our very decentralized group practice world, people just don't hear about, right? How many individual practitioners have been taught that they should, create as a group. So I think that's something to ponder very seriously.
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there about how to start a practice and then what it takes to grow a practice. It's one thing to have 5 providers in your group. Once you get to 10 or 15, suddenly there are communication channels. And that's something we see practices that are growing struggle with. You've established your practice based on how you want to practice, but how do you convert that vision into something, what I'd say is a little more corporate-y, where there are rules, processes, procedures that need to be followed, because the more people you have, the more complexity, the greater need for process. But how do you maintain your heart, your vision of your group as you are growing and building that up, where you need to have these kind of static rules in place in order to just keep the sanity?
It's a massive tension in group practices because most of them tend to be started by very visionary individuals who often are heart-centric. And I think sometimes their heart-centrism, as well as their visionary tendencies, move them away from documentation, move them away from systems creation. And so my experience is there do tend to be trade-offs in the short term. So it is true that when you grow, things are going to feel a little less intimate, but you can create groups within groups. So you can have departments, and those departments can be led, if they're led by really well trained managers, you can still ensure that there's intimacy for both clinicians and patients.
Absolutely, yeah, and then the clarity of vision for those managers down to those departments, it becomes super important. So we always recommend doing a vision exercise of some kind, figuring out what your core values are, making sure that there's buy-in from the staff because that's how you maintain the heart. And you said heart-centric. I haven't used that phrase or heard that phrase before, but I really like that. I might have to borrow that from you.
I don't deserve the original credit, but so borrow away.
All right, I'll might have to use that. We talk about providers being very relational, like it's the people, it's the relationship between the people, and by default, if you have 30 people, it's very hard to maintain those same relationships that you had when you had 5 people.
Yes. And you previewed my next question, thinking about the relational nature of group practices. Have you guys maintained relationships with practices, given that you've been doing this for more than 10 years? Have you maintained relationships with practices that you've seen grow from 5 to 10 to 30, 50 plus clinicians?
Absolutely. I actually still on my wall over here, I have our very first payment that we ever received. It was on June 25th, 2015 was the official first payment, and we still have that customer. She started with us. It was her and 2 other providers starting, and then grew to over 30 providers, and just maintained that relationship, a good solid relationship throughout. We see that a lot. It's listening and openness, I think, is the way that we approach things at Breezy. So and just honesty when we make mistakes. So, we've not been 100% perfect on her account or many accounts, but what we've learned is that, like, acknowledge when you've made a mistake, rectify it, and then just be real with people. And so we try to build that through our the entire culture of Breezy.
Have your values evolved over time, or have they always remained constant?
I think they've remained constant, but we went through an exercise to really define them. And I'm really proud of like, so this is a story I tell staff and people, but in high school I had blue hair and listened to punk rock, right? Like I was pretty anti-corporate and anti, just establishment. And so that still kind of works through a little bit, but now I have a much better understanding for, as we're talking about, like, those were some hard lessons learned with needing to have structure and policy and process in place. So there's rules for that. So we went through this exercise of, what are our core values, but we don't want to call them core values because we want to have a little bit of that blue hair streak in this, and that's in Breezy too. So we ended up coming up with what we call our ground rules. And the whole staff, like, knows them. Like, management kind of came up with the initial draft of it, but then we worked with everybody to get input, and we came up with some ground rules that we're really proud of, and that we use, and I think we use naturally. Where yeah, somebody really, stay limber is one of them. So, kudos to so and so for staying limber and helping out, staying a little bit late and helping out with this account because the audit was longer than expected or something like that. So, it's cool to see, people, the people on staff here relate to those.
Have you found, as you've grown as an organization, that you have been able to maintain those values and really hire for those values?
Yeah. So we hire and we measure against those values. They're fun, but they're real. And I can walk you through them if you want me to.
Yes, and how do you measure? I'm very curious about how you measure against them too.
Sure. The first one is pinky swear, and that's basically do what you promise, right? The next one is whip it. So if you have a problem, solve it. Then we have stay limber, which is be flexible, be willing to, go a little further. And then we have take good care, which is talking about taking care of yourself, your family, and your work. And then the last one is party on. So that's celebrate the wins and commiserate the losses. And so to measure against that, all 5 kind of take a different approach. And to measure against that, we just kind of we look at what we've done the last 3, 6, 12 months or whatever, and how has this person embodied those or supported those, and or missed the mark in some cases, in which case you have a conversation and come up with a plan for how to hit the mark next time.
So take me even just a little deeper here. Does this mean, for example, for Party On, that a manager is going to track how often an individual employee celebrates their wins?
We don't track it that closely. What Party On means, and we even have a group chat on that. It's everyone should feel appropriate celebrating something they've done, or celebrating somebody else who has done something. So from a true numbers accountability standpoint, it's not like we're tracking metrics against these, but really more of a bullet points as we go through the quarter or whatever.
Yeah, there probably is a way that in tracking values, you could be overly granular. And I think values are something we feel as well as something we think about. And if we get in our heads too much, if we get a little too analytical about them, it's sometimes beside the point.
Yeah, I look at tracking and accountability as it defines the actions of the job. And I look at the ground rules as, how do I interact with the people in my workplace, whether that's internally or customers externally as well.
I think this is a good sort of set of principles for people to think about when they're building their own group practices as well, because in the group practice universe, most practices will likely say that they have values. They probably aren't tracking them too much in any way. And those values may not be sufficiently distinguishable from the values of other group practices. And so it's very natural that there are certain things that most licensed therapists and thus group practices are going to agree on. But I think doing the work to come up with something that's a little more distinct, like pinky swear, I haven't heard that before, right? When I've asked people who run companies about their values, that's distinct. That feels real as a result, and thus easier to embody.
Yeah, it took us months to put that together, because the core, the values themselves also have to define the vision. And sometimes that vision, it's oftentimes group practices, it's the vision of one person for how they believe behavioral health should be practiced. And just because they believe it should be practiced that way, that doesn't mean it applies to all the potential clients out there in the world. But it's their vision, and it's the flag you wave to call people who, to come to you. So figuring that out, people put a lot of weight on differentiating. But it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, a lot of behavioral health is just like let's help people, right? So if helping people is it, everyone's going to have something around that. So it's hard to differentiate there, but differentiate where you can, or what makes you unique, or how you want this group practice to operate unique.
So let's go a little deeper there for folks. How were you able, you said that you did an exercise and it took some months to get there. What was that exercise like?
We put together a traction. We were partially implementing a business operating system, and part of that is this organizer. So we're putting together our vision traction organizer, and that really got us thinking about what do we care about. So we put together a bunch of words of what Breezy was about, and then had to group those together, and then realized that more than just the words themselves, like the what those words are, or how we just approach this, has to match our organization's approach to working with people, and working internally. So that's where we kind of turned it from be tenacious, let's not say tenacity, let's say whip it, like take care of those problems, or be flexible, stay limber. Where can we how can we just talk about being flexible in a way that really matches the personality that we want to share with the people around us, or the people that we hire, or just as we communicate with one another. And so converting, once we realized that, converting to that, and then defining that took quite a bit of time. And then once we had those initial definitions, wanted to bring in the staff. And so we had staff input on, like, this is what we're thinking. This is how we think it could be defined. How do you agree? You work here, us, Breezy. How do you think we should do it? Or what ideas do you have around that? And so we had, a few staff put in some recommendations, and built many of those then into what became the final definitions of what those words mean to us.
So in the end, you didn't really use an external consultant. You just went super deep and multiple internal stakeholders in the organization came together.
Yeah, and I'll say Jonases have a hard independent streak. I got my blue hair. My father grew up on a farm in Iowa where if you didn't have anything, you figured out how to make it. And so while there's definitely, I think consultants can play a very important role, and they've played a very important role to get us to where we are today. In this case, we really wanted to just spend the time, go through the struggle, work through it on our own to come up with something that was, just us.
Yeah, that was truly you. I love that. As we start to come towards the end of our time together, I've got one or two more questions for you, but maybe let me throw it over to you. Is there anything on RCM, on the core work that you guys do that you feel we should cover that practice owners should really know about?
We get a lot of people, we'll do an initial aging audit. Like we'll do an accounts receivable review. Focusing on that back end can just support the front end so much. Focusing on that, on what's truly a revenue cycle and keeping that as smooth as possible to just really handle those numbers. And a lot of providers, and I've met, my own father he's a provider and he's an administrator. Like he's been able to do both. He can live in both worlds. But that is not quite a unicorn, but they're quite rare. They're gems who really get the business side and the clinical side as well. And so we come across a lot of clinicians who have started practices, who have a great vision, who have built something up, but who start letting the business and operations side slide. And that's when they start, struggling. Either they get too bogged down in that, so they can't hire and staff up appropriately, or they're too focused on staff or clients that they are not watching their accounts receivable or their patient invoicing or just like their processes and procedures and their documentation. For those who are looking to grow, you need to pay attention to the business as a whole. And if you can't pay attention to parts, you need to find someone who can. And so look for someone like us to fill the gap or hire for it. But you need to have someone who it's their job to focus on the operations of the clinic.
Wise advice. So the final question is, when you're not running Breezy Billing or some of the other business that I know you do, what do you do for fun?
I play outside. We have a lot of, if you're going to find me anywhere on a weekend, I got to get away from the keyboard, so I'm usually outside. My parents and I, we both have wood burning fireplaces, and so we'll often be out in the woods cutting down dead trees or processing something or splitting wood or something like that. Or else, if it's not that, we're camping or hiking or heading to northern Minnesota to go play on a lake or something like that. So it's definitely get out, get away from the screens for me.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul, for the wisdom, the humanity, and I think we covered some really good hard business ground, but we also covered some of the softer stuff. It all informs the rest of it. It's all one big holistic picture. So I think practice owners will get some really good thoughts out of this conversation.
I hope so. Thanks for the opportunity.